Lock your doors before you sit down. Do not watch this alone. Because tonight it was almost their turn. And once, it was someone else's. Singapore, in the early hours of the morning, was never meant to feel dangerous. The city was built on order, on light, on the quiet assurance that crimes like this belonged elsewhere. But at 2 o'clock on January 25th, 1981, that illusion cracked open in the most ordinary of places. A man was walking through the ground floor of a public housing complex in Toa Payoh. He noticed a brown travel bag resting against a wall. It did not look abandoned. It looked placed. As he drew closer, something pale pressed against the zipper. Hair. Human hair. And then the shape became unmistakable. Inside the bag was the body of a child. The girl had been folded carefully into a fetal position, as if someone had tried to return her to the safety she no longer had. Her head rested near the opening. Her hair had been cut. Her sandals were missing. The police would later identify her as Agnes, 9 years old. She had last been seen the previous evening, waiting for her older sister outside the Church of the Holy Resurrection after classes had ended. She never made it home. At first, the scene felt like an isolated horror. A singular act of violence in a city unprepared to understand it. But the forensic examination told a colder story. Traces of sedatives were found in Agnes's body. There were injuries that suggested restraint, control, intent. And then, a week later, the phone rang. Agnes's mother picked up to hear a stranger's voice on the other end of the line. Calm. Almost reassuring. He told her not to cry. He told her that her daughter was not alone. And before the line went dead, he added one more sentence. He would be bringing another child to join her soon. We often imagine killers as creatures of chaos, driven by impulse or rage. But some crimes are planned with patience. Some are staged with purpose. And some are committed by people who believe, or pretend to believe, that something greater than themselves is watching, approving, demanding. Just days after that call, a second body was found. This time, it was a 10-year-old boy named Ghazali. His body lay on the grass not far from where Agnes had been discovered. And unlike the first scene, there was something else this time. A trail. Thin drops of blood leading away from the body across the pavement toward a staircase. Each step brought investigators closer to the unsettling possibility that the killer had never truly left the area. Singapore had not been facing an external threat. The danger was not hiding in the shadows of unfamiliar streets. It was embedded within the walls of the same buildings where families slept, children played, and neighbors trusted one another without question. And the evidence would soon suggest that the killer did not fear the law. He feared something else. The discovery of Agnes's body shattered any remaining sense of routine within the Toa Payoh housing estate. What had once been a quiet cluster of concrete towers now carried an invisible weight. Doors closed earlier. Parents held their children tighter. And, for the first time in years, the police presence became a permanent fixture, rather than a passing reassurance. The autopsy did not take long to reveal what the scene alone could not fully explain. Agnes had not wandered into danger by chance. Traces of sedatives were found in her system, substance commonly used to induce sleep or compliance. The injuries on her small body suggested restraint, not frenzy, not accident. This was not a crime born of sudden violence. It was deliberate. Investigators noted details that felt disturbingly intentional. Her hair had been cut. Her slippers were gone. To some officers, these tales hinted at an attempt to strip the victim of identity. To others, they suggested something more symbolic, an effort to prevent her from returning, from following. At that stage, these interpretations remained unspoken. The priority was simple: find who did this and find them before they did it again. That urgency became unbearable just days later. The call came into the Agnes household without warning. The voice on the other end was male. Calm. Unemotional. He spoke as if delivering a courtesy rather than a threat. He told Agnes's mother to stop crying. He said her daughter was not alone. And then he promised that another child would be joining her soon. Police immediately placed the family under protection, but the damage had already been done. The call changed the nature of the case. This was no longer an investigation into a single murder. It was a countdown. On May 7, 1981, the countdown ended. Early that morning, residents discovered the body of a young boy lying on the grass outside Block 10 of the same housing complex. He was later identified as Ghazali Mizuki, 10 years old. He had last been seen playing with his cousins the previous evening. There had been no screams, no reports of a struggle. He had vanished in plain sight. Unlike the first scene, Ghazali's body told investigators something new. Blood had pooled beneath his nose, and more importantly, it had not stopped there. Thin droplets marked a path away from the body, stretching across the pavement toward a nearby stairwell. Someone had moved him while he was bleeding. Someone had failed to notice, or failed to care. Police followed the trail. Each step narrowed the field. The blood did not disperse randomly. It led with quiet certainty toward one of the residential blocks, up the stairs, floor by floor, until it stopped outside a single apartment on the 12th floor. The door belonged to a man named Adrian Lim. When officers knocked, Lim appeared composed. He was dressed as if preparing to leave. His demeanor was cooperative, almost relaxed. There was nothing in his immediate behavior that matched the violence they had just witnessed downstairs. But that calm unraveled the moment they stepped inside. The apartment was unlike anything the officers had encountered before. Every surface seemed stained with a dull red hue. The air carried a metallic smell that could not be explained away by cooking or household waste. In the center of the living space stood a makeshift altar. Upon it were religious objects drawn from multiple belief systems. A crucifix, statues of Buddhist figures, Hindu deities, Thai and Chinese spiritual icons. None were pristine. All were smeared with dried blood. It was not devotion. It was display. When questioned about a small drop of blood on the floor, Lim hesitated. He claimed it was candle wax. Then, realizing the weakness of that explanation, he changed his story. He said it was chicken blood from preparing food for a holiday meal. The inconsistency did not go unnoticed. During the search, officers found a scrap of paper tucked inside a phone directory. Written on it was a phone number, Agnes's home number. Next to it, her name. At that moment, the investigation shifted from suspicion to certainty. Adrian Lim was taken into custody. Born in 1942, Lim had grown up in poverty. He left school early and spent years drifting between jobs. At one point, he worked in a role that brought him into contact with internal security services. It was there, investigators later believed, that he learned how police investigations unfolded, how evidence was gathered, how mistakes were made. Over time, Lim developed an obsession with spiritual authority. he studied foreign languages. He observed traditional healers, known as bomos, and eventually he began presenting himself as one of them. Clients came seeking cures for illness, misfortune, and despair. Lim gave them rituals instead. Performances. Tricks designed to convince them they were possessed, cursed, or chosen. The method was always the same. Create fear, then offer control. By the time of his arrest, Lim had not only perfected this manipulation, he had found people willing to surrender themselves entirely to it. But Lim was never alone. And he never acted alone. Lim's arrest did not bring immediate clarity. Instead, it opened a deeper and more unsettling layer of the investigation. The physical evidence inside the apartment was disturbing, but it was the psychological architecture behind it that demanded closer scrutiny. Adrian Lim did not present himself as a criminal. He presented himself as an intermediary, a man who claimed to stand between the human world and forces beyond it. And for years, people had believed him. Investigators began reconstructing Lim's life, not as a timeline of jobs and addresses, but as a pattern of influence. After leaving school, Lim drifted through low-skilled work, never settling for long. What remained consistent was his growing fascination with spiritual authority. He observed traditional healers who commanded respect in rural communities. He learned their language, their gestures, their rituals, and then he simplified them into something easier to sell. Lim's methods were crude but effective. He used deception disguised as ceremony. One of his most common techniques involved an egg. He would pierce it with a needle, insert foreign objects, and reseal the shell. When the egg was rolled across a client's body and broken open, the objects inside became proof of possession. Fear did the rest. Those who questioned him were dismissed as spiritually blind. Those who complied were rewarded with reassurance. Over time, Lim established himself not as a healer, but as an authority figure. Someone whose word could not be challenged without consequence. This dynamic became far more dangerous when he encountered Catherine Van Mui, later known as Tran Mai Chao. Chao's life had been shaped by vulnerability long before she met Lim. Raised in a household that favored sons over daughters, she was forced to leave school early. By her late teens, she was working in a bar, navigating a world that demanded resilience while offering little support. Depression followed, but so did isolation. When colleagues suggested she seek spiritual healing, Chao complied. That decision brought her to Lim's apartment. What began as treatment quickly became dependence. Lim encouraged frequent visits. He spoke in foreign languages during rituals, creating an aura of authenticity and mystery. Chao did not understand the words, but she understood his authority. Over time, Lim isolated her from outside influences. When his first wife finally left, taking their children with her, Chao stepped into the vacuum he had created. Lim called her his holy wife. The title was not symbolic. It was functional. Chao was told she had been chosen for a sacred path. In reality, she was being conditioned. Lim controlled her movements, her income, and, eventually, her body. He forced her into prostitution and took the money. When her mental state deteriorated, he reframed it as spiritual contamination. His solution was punishment disguised as purification. Electric shocks. The violence escalated slowly enough that resistance felt impossible. The second woman entered Lim's orbit through a familiar path. Ha Jia Hong was a 24-year-old factory worker. Her mother brought her to Lim seeking fortune-telling. Lim claimed Hong's husband, Benson, was harming her spiritually. He offered a ritual to sever the influence, Hong believed him. She moved into Lim's apartment without her husband's knowledge. When Benson came looking for answers, Lim assured him that reconciliation was the goal. He suggested a shared ritual involving electrical stimulation, framed as healing. Hong lost consciousness almost immediately. Benson did not. Lim increased the voltage deliberately. Benson collapsed and never recovered. The death was staged as an accident involving household repairs. Hong, traumatized and unstable, reported the incident as instructed. She was hospitalized briefly, then retrieved by Lim, before doctors could intervene further. By then, both women were completely dependent. Lim's control was absolute. He forced them to earn money. He used them as physical outlets for his violence. And eventually, he introduced them to a new belief, that consuming blood would grant power. That pain was currency. That suffering was necessary. Blood was drawn at illegal clinics. Mixed. Consumed. The belief system grew darker when Lim sensed exposure. In 1980, a woman named Lucy visited the apartment for work. Chow convinced her that a spirit was attached to her. Lim offered treatment. Lucy refused. She was drugged, assaulted, and when she escaped, she went to the police. It was the first time Lim's world felt threatened. In response, he staged possession. He claimed a goddess was angry, that she demanded sacrifice, not symbolic, not metaphorical. Human. Lim later claimed this escalation was strategic. He believed that a crime of sufficient magnitude would distract authorities from his fraudulent practices. What followed was not madness. It was calculation wrapped in ritual language. Children were brought to the apartment, rejected, until 2 were deemed suitable. When the police finally closed in, Lim did not claim innocence. He claimed divinity. By the time the murders of Agnes and Ghazali were uncovered, Adrian Lim's belief system had reached its final and most dangerous form. What began as deception had evolved into something far more rigid. Lim no longer merely pretended to channel divine forces. He behaved as though he embodied them. Inside the apartment, ritual had replaced routine. Catherine Than Mui and Hajia Hong were no longer treated as individuals. They were instruments. Lim told them that their suffering was proof of devotion, that obedience would lead to transcendence, and that disobedience would invite punishment, not from him but from the gods he claimed to serve. Electric shocks became common. Beatings were reframed as cleansing. Hunger was spiritual discipline. Each act of cruelty was accompanied by language designed to erase responsibility. Lim did not say he wanted blood. He said blood was required. As scrutiny from authorities increased after Lucy's report, Lim grew paranoid. He believed the attention threatened his power. According to later testimony, he concluded that only an act of overwhelming magnitude would divert the police away from his fraudulent practices. The solution he arrived at was sacrifice. Not symbolic sacrifice. Literal. Lim instructed Chow and Hong to bring children to the apartment. Several were rejected. Too old. Too weak. Not suitable. The criteria were never spiritual. They were aesthetic. Controlled. Chosen. Agnes was the first. She was approached near the church where she had been waiting for her sister. Lim appeared unthreatening. He spoke gently. She followed. Once inside the apartment, she was given sedatives. What followed was methodical. There was no chaos. No hesitation. Blood was drawn using needles. Consumed. Agnes was then forced face down into a basin of water. When she stopped moving, Lim applied electric shocks to ensure there would be no uncertainty. Her body was placed into a travel bag and left in a location designed to be discovered quickly. 2 weeks later, Ghazali was targeted. Unlike Agnes, he resisted. He struggled. Lim responded with force. The violence escalated. Blood was drawn again. This time in greater volume. Ghazali was also submerged in water. Hong held him down. Chow assisted. When blood began to flow from his nose during transport, it created the trail that would ultimately lead police back to the apartment. Lim believed the acts would elevate him, that the gods would reward his obedience. Instead, they exposed him. When arrested, Lim denied responsibility, then contradicted himself, then claimed divine instruction. Chow and Hong, initially silent, eventually cooperated. Both stated they understood what they were doing. Both said they were terrified of Lim. Both said they believed the consequences of refusal would be worse than compliance. Psychiatric evaluations followed. Doctors concluded that Lim was not suffering from a psychotic break. He was coherent, calculated, capable of planning and deception. Chow and Hong were diagnosed with mental illnesses, but neither was found incapable of understanding right from wrong. Their vulnerability explained influence. It did not erase accountability. The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. On May 25, 1983, the court delivered its verdict. Adrian Lim, Catherine Than Mui, and Hajia Hong were sentenced to death. When the sentence was read, Lim smiled. He thanked the court. He claimed liberation. In prison, Chow and Hong expressed remorse. Both sought baptism. Both prayed. Lim refused all religious representatives. He did not recant. He did not repent. He maintained that his beliefs were intact until the end. On November 25, 1988, the sentences were carried out. Chow and Hong showed fear. Lim did not. Witnesses reported that he continued to smile as the noose was placed around his neck. Many asked why. Some said it was madness. Others said delusion. But perhaps the answer was simpler. Lim had spent years constructing an identity built on power, fear, and reverence. To abandon that identity at the moment of death would have meant facing what he truly was. When the police finally closed in, Lim did not claim innocence. He claimed divinity. The trial of Adrian Lim and his 2 accomplices forced Singapore to confront an uncomfortable truth. This case was never about gods, demons, or forces beyond human control. It was about how easily belief could be weaponized and how devastating the consequences became when fear replaced reason. Throughout the proceedings, Lim maintained a posture of authority. He did not beg. He did not plead confusion. His answers were deliberate, measured, and often contradictory. Psychiatrists testified that he understood the nature of his actions. He understood the law. More importantly, he understood people. He knew how to identify weakness, how to offer meaning where there was despair, and how to turn devotion into obedience. The court rejected his claims of divine instruction. There was no evidence of supernatural compulsion, no loss of cognitive function. What remained was intent, clear, sustained, and lethal. Catherine Than Mui and Hajia Hong stood beside him as the verdict was read. Unlike Lim, their reactions revealed fracture. Both women acknowledged their actions. Both admitted they knew the children would die. Their defense rested not on denial, but on fear. fear of Lim, fear of punishment, fear of losing the only structure that had come to define their existence. The court did not excuse them. Vulnerability explained their submission, but it did not absolve their choices. On May 25, 1983, all three were sentenced to death. In the years that followed, the paths of the condemned diverged. In prison, Chow and Hong sought forgiveness. They requested baptism. They prayed daily. Guards noted visible remorse. Whether it came from guilt, fear, or genuine awakening was impossible to measure. What remained undeniable was that in their final years, they no longer claimed divine purpose. Lim did. He refused visits from religious leaders. He rejected offers of counseling. He clung to the belief system he had constructed, even as it stripped him of everything else. Power, control, audience. On November 25, 1988, the executions were carried out by hanging. Witnesses described Chow and Hong as visibly terrified. Lim, by contrast, smiled. Even as the noose tightened, he maintained the expression of someone who believed he had transcended judgment. Many have since tried to explain that smile. Some say it was insanity. Others say it was arrogance. But perhaps it was neither. Perhaps it was the final consequence of a man who had spent his life refusing to confront his own humanity. To admit fear at the end would have meant admitting that the gods he served never existed. That the power he wielded was always an illusion. In the aftermath, phrases like possessed and cursed circulated freely. They offered comfort. They shifted blame. But they also obscured the truth. There was no demon in that apartment, no divine command, no ritual that demanded blood. There was only a man who chose desire over restraint, control over compassion, and myth over responsibility. And in that sense, the most terrifying thing about the Adrian Lim murders was not what people believed. It was what one person was willing to do when belief became an excuse.